Cu Chi District, South Vietnam, January 1966. An American battalion has just set up a base camp on a flat stretch of jungle clearing. They've bulldozed the trees. They've laid concertina wire around the perimeter. They've dug fighting positions, set up mortar pits, established radio contact with headquarters. By every measure of American military doctrine, this is a secure position. 300 men, heavily armed, dug in, with air support on call, and artillery within range. The commanding officer walks the perimeter at dusk and reports the position satisfactory. That night, the first man dies. A sergeant sleeping inside the perimeter wire, throat cut, no alarm triggered, no perimeter breach detected, no footprints, no evidence that anyone came in or went out. The guards were awake. The wire was intact. The claymores were untouched. At dawn, the battalion searches the entire camp. They find nothing. No enemy, no trail, no explanation. The dead sergeant is zipped into a body bag and loaded onto a helicopter. That night, 2 more soldiers die the same way. Inside the wire, inside the camp, inside what is supposed to be the safest ground in the district. No enemy is ever seen. No shot is ever fired. They simply appear, kill, and vanish, as if the earth itself opened up, swallowed a killer, and closed again without leaving a mark. The battalion commander radios headquarters with a report that his superiors do not believe. He tells them the enemy is coming from underground. The deaths continue for weeks, not just at this camp. Across the entire Cu Chi district, American and South Vietnamese units are reporting the same impossible events. Patrols ambushed from positions that were cleared hours earlier. Snipers firing from locations that are searched immediately and found completely empty. Explosions detonating under roads that were swept for mines that same morning. Soldiers sitting in foxholes being shot from behind, inside their own defensive lines, by an enemy that was never seen entering or leaving. Intelligence officers compile the reports and look for patterns. They find chaos. Attacks come from every direction, at every time of day and night, in areas that have been searched, bombed, defoliated, and declared secure. The Viet Cong and Chu Chi seem to operate by different rules of physics. They appear and disappear at will. They attack and then cease to exist. Commanders begin using a phrase that will define the entire campaign in this district. They call them ghosts. The officers at Military Assistance Command Vietnam in Saigon study the reports. They order more patrols, more sweeps, more aerial reconnaissance, more firepower. None of it changes anything. The attacks continue, the ambushes continue. The men keep dying from an enemy that cannot be found because the enemy is not hiding in the jungle. The enemy is hiding under it. March 1966. A platoon from the 25th Infantry Division is on patrol through dense jungle 2 kilometers from their base camp. The point man stops. He's seen something. The patrol halts. The lieutenant moves forward. The point man is staring at the ground. There's a disturbance in the soil. A rectangular outline, barely visible, covered with leaves and a thin layer of dirt. It looks like nothing. It looks like the jungle floor. But the edges are too straight. The lieutenant kneels down. He brushes away the leaves carefully. Underneath is a wooden trapdoor, roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, fitted so precisely into the ground that with the covering replaced, it is virtually invisible. He lifts the edge. Below the trapdoor is a hole, a shaft going straight down into darkness. The air that comes up from the hole is warm and damp and smells of earth and smoke and something else, something human. The lieutenant shines his flashlight into the shaft. It drops about 3 meters, then turns sharply to the left and disappears. He cannot see the bottom. He cannot see where it leads. He radios back to base. We found a hole. The response from base is underwhelming. Collapse it and move on. But the lieutenant is curious. He sends the thinnest man in the platoon down into the shaft with a flashlight and a pistol. The soldier descends, squeezes through the turn, and disappears. For 11 minutes there is no contact, no sound from below. The platoon waits in the jungle, staring at the hole, weapons raised. Then the soldier comes back up. His face is pale, His hands are shaking. "Down there," he says. "There's a tunnel. Not just a hole, a tunnel. It goes in both directions. I crawled about 30 meters and it branches. One branch goes left, one goes right, one goes down to a deeper level. I could hear people. Somewhere ahead in the dark, I could hear people talking." The lieutenant stares at the hole. He has just discovered one entrance to a system that stretches for over 250 kilometers beneath the jungles of Cu Chi, a system that has been under construction for over 20 years, a system so vast, so deep, and so sophisticated that an entire army lives inside it. The tunnels of Cu Chi did not begin with the Americans. They began with the French. In the 1940s, when France still controlled Vietnam as a colonial territory, the Viet Minh, the Vietnamese resistance movement fighting for independence, needed a way to hide from French patrols. The jungles provided cover, but not safety. French troops could search the jungle. French aircraft could see movement from above. French informants could report locations. The Viet Minh needed to become invisible, and in Cu Chi, the soil gave them the answer. The ground beneath Cu Chi is laterite clay, red, dense, remarkably stable when dry. Unlike sand or loose soil, laterite holds its shape. You can carve a tunnel into it and the walls will stand without reinforcement. You can dig a chamber the size of a room and the ceiling will not collapse. The Viet Minh discovered this property and began digging. At first, the tunnels were simple, short passages connecting hidden shelters, a place to hide weapons, a place to sleep for a night and then move on. Individual tunnels, scattered, unconnected. But as the war against the French continued, the tunnels grew. Villagers dug at night by hand, using short-handled hoes that could be used in the cramped space underground. They carried the excavated soil out in baskets and scattered it in the jungle, or dumped it in bomb craters and rivers where it would not be noticed. The clay was hard. Progress was measured in centimeters per hour, but they did not stop. Night after night, month after month, year after year, the network expanded. By the time the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the tunnels of Cu Chi were already significant, but nobody outside the resistance knew how significant. And the digging did not stop when the French left. It accelerated. Through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, as the conflict between North and South Vietnam intensified and American military advisors began arriving, the Viet Cong expanded the tunnel system into something that defied imagination. They did not simply dig hiding places, they built a civilization underground. The system eventually comprised 3 distinct levels. The first level sat roughly 3 meters below the surface. This was the operational level, closest to the surface, used for rapid access to fighting positions, communication routes, and quick strike exits. Tunnels on this level were barely large enough for a person to crawl through, typically 80 centimeters wide and 80 centimeters high. You could not walk, you could not stand, you could only crawl, on your hands and knees, sometimes on your belly, through passages that twisted and turned to prevent a straight line of fire from one end to the other. Every 10 to 15 meters, the tunnel changed direction. Every junction was a potential ambush point. The second level sat 6 to 8 meters below the surface. This was the living and logistics level. Here the tunnels widened slightly. Side chambers had been carved out for specific purposes. Sleeping quarters for dozens of fighters, arranged in rows. Each person allocated a space barely wider than their body. Kitchens where food was prepared using smokeless stoves, ingenious devices that channeled cooking smoke through long horizontal vents that dispersed it at ground level over a wide area so that no concentrated plume was visible from above. Storage rooms for rice, weapons, ammunition, and medical supplies. Meeting rooms where commanders briefed their units. The third level sat 8 to 10 meters below the surface. This was the deepest and most protected level. Here were the hospitals, operating rooms lit by oil lamps, and in some cases, by electricity generated from captured American generators. Surgeons performed operations underground using instruments sterilized over charcoal fires. Wounded fighters recovered in chambers where the air was recycled through ventilation shafts, disguised as termite mounds on the surface. Here also were weapons workshops where Viet Cong armorers manufactured grenades, mines, and booby traps from unexploded American ordnance. They took bombs that failed to detonate, disassembled them by hand in the dark, and rebuilt them into weapons that would kill the men who dropped them. The entire system was connected by a web of narrow passages, vertical shafts, and underwater sections that could be sealed against gas or flooding. Air shafts, hundreds of them, rose to the surface through elaborate disguises. Some emerged through hollow trees, some through the bases of anthills, some through seemingly natural cracks in the earth that had been carefully engineered to look untouched. The ventilation system was so effective that American soldiers could stand directly above an air shaft and not detect it. The entrances were engineering masterpieces of deception. Some were hidden beneath rivers, accessible only by swimming underwater through a flooded passage and emerging inside the tunnel on the other side. Some were concealed under the cooking fires of village huts. Move the fire, lift the hidden cover, descend into the tunnel, replace the cover, rebuild the fire. The ashes covered any trace. Some were built into the walls of wells. A fighter would climb down a well, push aside a stone at a specific depth, crawl through a short horizontal passage, and emerge in the tunnel system. From the surface, it was just a well. Some entrances were so small that only a Vietnamese fighter of typical build could fit through them. This was deliberate. A larger American soldier physically could not enter. Trapdoors were fitted with locks that could only be opened from inside. False entrances were constructed that led to dead ends packed with booby traps. Punji stake pits, grenades with tripwires, scorpions and snakes placed in containers that would break open when disturbed. The tunnel builders designed these traps not just to kill, but to terrorize. They wanted the enemy to fear the tunnels themselves, to dread the idea of entering, to see every hole in the ground as a potential death. The American military's first response to the tunnel threat was conventional: bomb them. In 1965 and 1966, the U.S. Air Force conducted massive bombing campaigns over Cu Chi. B-52 Stratofortresses dropped thousands of tons of high explosives on the district. The ground shook for kilometers in every direction. Craters 30 meters wide and 10 meters deep pockmarked the landscape. Entire sections of jungle were erased. The surface of Cu Chi looked like the surface of the moon. American commanders were confident. Nothing could survive that kind of bombardment. They were wrong. The deepest tunnels sat 10 meters below the surface. The bombs cratered the top layer of soil, but the shock waves dissipated before reaching the third level. The tunnel engineers had already calculated this. They had measured the depth at which American bombs were effective and dug below that threshold. When the bombing stopped and patrols moved in to assess the damage, they found the same thing they always found. Nothing. No bodies, no destroyed tunnels, no evidence that anyone had been harmed. Within hours of the bombers leaving, Viet Cong fighters emerged from their tunnels into the cratered landscape and resumed operations. The craters actually helped them. They used the bomb craters as new positions, as water collection points, as camouflaged exits. The bombing had rearranged the surface geography in ways that gave the Viet Cong more cover, not less. The second approach was chemical. The Americans pumped CS gas, a powerful tear gas, into every tunnel entrance they could find. The theory was simple. Gas goes where people go. Fill the tunnels with gas, and the enemy either comes out or suffocates. The Viet Cong had anticipated this. They had built water-sealed trapdoors at regular intervals throughout the tunnel system. When gas was detected, fighters closed the trapdoors, sealing off sections of the tunnel. The gas filled the sealed section and stopped. The rest of the system remained clear. They had also positioned charcoal filters and wet cloth barriers at key junctions that absorbed and neutralized the gas. In some sections, tunnels dipped below the water table, creating U-shaped water traps that gas could not cross. The gas attacks achieved almost nothing. The third approach was water. American engineers diverted rivers and pumped millions of gallons of water into tunnel openings, attempting to flood the system. The water filled the upper levels of the tunnels and poured in for hours. When engineers inspected the results, they found that the water had been absorbed by the laterite clay and channeled through drainage systems the Viet Cong had built specifically for this purpose. The tunnels had built-in drainage. Sloped floors directed water to collection points. Sump chambers at the lowest levels absorbed overflow. Some sections were designed to flood deliberately, sacrificial passages that would fill with water, while sealed doors protected the rest of the system. The flooding failed. The fourth approach was the most extreme. Operation Crimp in January 1966 deployed over 8,000 American and Australian troops to search and destroy the tunnel system in the Iron Triangle, a Viet Cong stronghold adjacent to Cu Chi. Troops swept through the area on foot, searching every meter of ground. They found tunnel entrances. They destroyed what they could. They called in bulldozers to collapse surface-level passages. They declared the operation a success. Within 3 weeks, the Viet Cong were operating from the same tunnels again. The collapsed passages had been re-excavated. New entrances had been constructed. The network was not just resilient. It was alive. It adapted, regrew, and expanded faster than it could be destroyed. The frustration at command level was immense. They had bombed the tunnels, gassed them, flooded them, bulldozed them, and burned the jungle above them. Nothing worked. The enemy remained invisible, untouchable, and lethal. Every conventional tool in the American arsenal had been applied, and everyone had failed. The tunnels were not just a military installation. They were a concept that American firepower was not designed to defeat. You cannot bomb an idea. You cannot flood a strategy. You cannot gas a system that has been specifically engineered to survive gas. The American military had run out of technology. They had not yet run out of men. By mid-1966, a decision was made that would create one of the most terrifying specialties in the history of warfare. If machines could not clear the tunnels, men would have to go in. Volunteers were called for. The job description was simple and horrifying. You go into the tunnel, alone, with a flashlight, a pistol, and a knife. You crawl into absolute darkness, into passages so narrow that you cannot turn around, where the enemy is waiting, where the air might be poisoned, where every centimeter might be booby-trapped, where the walls themselves might collapse, where you cannot call for help because your radio does not work underground. You find the enemy. You kill him or he kills you. You map what you find. You come back if you come back. They called them tunnel rats. The men who volunteered were a specific type, small in stature because the tunnels were built for Vietnamese bodies, and larger men could not fit, psychologically resistant to claustrophobia because the tunnels were sometimes so tight that a man could not raise his arms above his chest, willing to accept odds that were, by any honest assessment, terrible. The tunnel rats entered the tunnels one at a time. They crawled on their bellies through passages that stank of smoke, sweat, decay, and the chemical residue of gas attacks. They navigated by touch as much as by sight because using a flashlight made you a target. They carried their pistols in front of them, finger beside the trigger, knowing that if they encountered an enemy in the tunnel, there would be no room to dodge, no room to retreat, no room for anything except pointing the weapon forward and firing. The encounters underground were unlike any other combat in the war. Two men crawling toward each other in a space the size of a coffin. The one who heard the other first usually survived. The one who hesitated usually did not. Some tunnel rats carried knives because in passages too tight to aim a pistol, a blade was more practical. They found hospitals with patients still in beds. They found kitchens with food still cooking. They found command centers with maps still on the walls. They found booby traps that killed them. They found dead ends that were sealed behind them by Viet Cong fighters who had been watching them crawl past in the dark. They found chambers filled with scorpions. They found grenades wired to trapdoors. They found the underground world that had been defeating the American military for years. And they mapped it, meter by meter, tunnel by tunnel, chamber by chamber. They drew maps of what they found and brought them back to the surface. The maps revealed the scale of what the Americans were facing. Hundreds of kilometers, thousands of chambers, an underground nation. The tunnel rats changed the war in Cu Chi, but they did not end it. The tunnels were too vast, too deep, and too well defended to be cleared by small teams of men with pistols. For every section that was mapped and destroyed, another section was dug. For every entrance that was sealed, two more were opened. The Viet Cong continued to operate from the tunnels throughout the entire war. They launched the Tet Offensive in 1968, partly from tunnel staging areas in Cu Chi, moving thousands of fighters through underground passages to attack positions that American intelligence believed were secure. When the war ended in 1975, the tunnel system of Cucci was still functioning, damaged, reduced, partially collapsed, but alive. The system that had defeated French colonial forces in the 1940s had also defeated the most powerful military force in the history of the world, not through superior weapons, not through superior numbers, not through technology, through the understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can build is not a weapon, but a hole in the ground, a place where an army can disappear, a place where bombs cannot reach, a place where the earth itself becomes the armor. The tunnels of Cucci prove something that military strategists had never wanted to admit, that there are enemies you cannot see, cannot find, and cannot destroy, no matter how many bombs you drop or how many soldiers you send, because they are not on the battlefield, they are beneath it, and the battlefield belongs to them.